Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and today we're doing an iPhone tier list. I actually did one of these a few years back, I think late 2021, but not only have we seen some more iPhones since then, but I think my perspective's changed a bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through and do this new tier list, then we're going to also compare it to my old one to see what's potentially changed. Now, before we actually start, there'll be a link in the description with your own tier list maker that you can use yourself, make your own tier list, and I'd encourage you to post it on the Discord. You can use the Today's Video channel, and yeah, I'd love to see what you guys come up with. Ignore the clingy dog, by the way. I swear she knows when I'm recording. She just always has to be here. Anyways, so to start with, we have a lot of iPhones. This whole bottom tier, these are all new since the last time I did this. I'm very curious to see how this all pans out. So we're not going to just go chronologically this time. I'm assuming I did last time. So we're going to start with 2007, then to 2023 phones, and then 2008 phones, then 2022 phones, and so on and so forth. So let's not dawdle around here and just get right into this, shall we? So we start things off with the ever important iPhone 2G, aka the first iPhone, and basically the first modern smartphone of all time. Now, last video, I'm pretty confident I probably put this in B tier if I had to guess, and there's a few reasons for that. So the biggest pro for it is that it's the first iPhone, and it's incredibly important. The biggest con for it is that as far as iPhones go, it wasn't anything that special. It only got a couple years of updates. iOS 3 on it, or iPhone OS 3 actually, is really slow. It didn't even have the App Store when it first came out. There was a lot of kind of downsides to it. However, it's also the first iPhone. The design is surprisingly premium for smartphones at the time. Most would be plastic, and this one is not. It's aluminum. I also recently did like an hour-long retrospective on the iPhone 2G, and I think my perspective has changed as a result of that. So I don't know if it's fair to put it in S tier, because we do have to take into context that we're talking about iPhones, and if we're just going by importance and innovation, I mean, the 2G is so far off the charts, it's not even fair, because it set the precedent for everything. If you use an iPhone 2G, it is very similar to what we have today, whether on iPhone or on Android. So we're going to start by sticking the iPhone 2G, I think we're going to put it in A tier because we're taking into account the fact that it didn't perform as well as other iPhones later in its life. So we're going to stick with A tier for now. Yes, it got slow. Yes, it didn't have a lot of updates, but the amount of good it brought. Watch that retrospective if you haven't after this. I mean, the phone was just incredible. So anyways, that's that. Now we go to the most recent iPhones, starting with the iPhone 15 here. So when there are two phones, so like the 15 and the 15 Plus, we're just going to combine those into one because they're the same thing practically. This will apply to even say the iPhone 7 and 7 Plus, even though the 7 Plus does have two lenses. We're still just going to combine them because it's easy. Now, the iPhone 15 didn't do a whole lot over the 14, but what it did bring was the dynamic island, which is nice, new color options, and basically just a standard small non-pro upgrade. Future Josh here. I forgot about USB-C for some reason for both the 15 and the 15 Pro. Definitely a big deal, but I don't think it would change any of my rankings, so wanted to just mention it. Overall, pretty boring phone and not that special, so I'm going to stick it for now in D tier. Pretty straightforward. We'll see if we stick with that, but we probably will. I think it's a decent phone to buy right now, but in terms of the entire iPhone lineup, I don't think it's anything special. As for the 15 Pro, the 15 Pro is a hard one to judge, especially right away, because the thing is, the 15 Pro actually didn't change much from the 14 Pro. They brought in titanium, and then they did the basic upgrades they do every year, cameras, speeds, etc. Nothing that fancy. We also had some early issues. The phone was overheating. I experienced that myself having a 15 Pro Max. The phone is less durable than the 14 Pro. I don't know if that means stainless steel is inherently better. There are some benefits to titanium, such as the phone being quite light. Phones were getting pretty heavy. I'm gonna stick it in D tier for now, actually, just because it didn't really bring a whole lot. I love my 15 Pro Max, don't get me wrong. Here it is, right? I really like this phone. My 14 Pro is very similar. I mainly like this phone because I actually quite like the bigger size that I went for this time around. Battery life on it is amazing, I'll give it that. But we're gonna stick it in D tier and keep going, and we'll see. We might end up changing some of this as we go along. We should also probably speed up, or this video is gonna take forever. Okay, so after the iPhone 15 Pro, we're going to 2008 with the iPhone 3G. This phone's interesting because it's essentially the first iPhone in a plastic shell, but with 3G networking and significantly cheaper. I think the first iPhone started at like $500 or so, and the iPhone 3G was like $200 when it came out. So obviously huge difference there, and it's because Apple got better, more cost effective, and this plastic made more sense for the time. Overall, okay phone. The biggest issue with it for me is that the updates, iOS 4 on here is slow, like really slow. Because of that, I'm gonna stick it in D tier just because it performed so poorly. And this is really hard coming at it from this perspective, isn't it? Man, I was thinking it would be a little easier, but no, this is difficult so far. All right, iPhone 3G, nothing too special, but definitely important for making iPhone cheaper at a time where smartphones were very new and people didn't want to pay a lot for them. But moving to 2022. So we'll start with the earliest 2022 phone, which is the iPhone SE. This was released, I think, March 2022, and it's very similar to the SE2 and the iPhone 8. It's the same body, already, but they updated the chipset to the A15. They brought 5G networking, not Wave 5G, but 5G. And yeah, it was a pretty basic upgrade. My biggest issue with this phone is the fact that it is an iPhone 8. So the camera's an iPhone 8. It doesn't have a night mode. The price is over $400. In 2022, I think it was decent value. In 2024, when it's still being sold, it is terrible value. The battery life on it isn't particularly good, and Apple definitely should have done more to improve it over the SE2. So I'm going to stick it in E tier, not F tier, because I know people like this phone, and if you're using it right now, I mean, it's not like it's a bad phone, right? It isn't. It's solid. The iPhone 8 was solid. The iPhone 8's also 7 years old, and they shouldn't be selling that hardware for as much money as they are. I've done a video on that too, just on the terrible value proposition. We're going to go with E tier for now, and we'll see. Okay, iPhone 14 and 14 Plus. So this is the first time Apple scrapped the mini phones, and they went for a Plus, which I'm not a huge fan of, but some people would be. I think it's fine. This one's going to go solidly in F tier though. Okay, before anybody with an iPhone 14 gets angry at me, this doesn't mean this is a bad phone. It's just not a good iPhone upgrade over the 13 because it's not an upgrade over the 13. The cameras didn't really change, and the chipset is the 13 Pro chipset versus, you know, the 13 chipset. Like, there's barely any difference. It's a couple GPU cores or something like that. There's a bit more RAM, which does help, but overall it was basically the same phone. And I think for whatever reason, Apple wanted there to be more disparity between the Pro line and the non-Pros when it comes to performance and things like that. So what they did is they had to essentially make one of their new phones worse upgrade-wise in order to make that gap between the Pro and the non-Pro larger. And the 14 was the victim of that. So solidly an F tier because the 13 is really similar. Doesn't mean it's a bad phone. The iPhone 13 was a good phone. In fact, right now, if you have an iPhone 14, I think it's a great phone. The 13 is also a great phone. That's the problem. They didn't do enough to upgrade it, and that's how we're looking at this. Then you have the iPhone 14 Pro. Now, the 14 Pro is interesting. This brought the dynamic island, which I think is actually a really underrated feature. It's not just any gimmick. I think it actually adds a lot to the iOS experience. So because of that, for me, this is going to be in C tier. I'm going to go with C tier because the reality is from the 13 Pro, it's not a huge upgrade or anything. The design is the same, but the dynamic island is nice. Just 14 Pro, 14 Pro Max, solid, good iPhones. And for me, C tier, I mean, that's still good. That's not bad. None of these phones are really bad, but you know, it's a good phone. C tier's fair. All right, 2009, we have the iPhone 3GS. Now the iPhone 3GS, I think, is probably the perfect example of a B tier iPhone. The design, exact same as the iPhone 3G. However, it literally doubled the speeds. The camera got a bit better. It's just a better phone. And the most important thing for me is the longevity of it. This was the first iPhone that did really well for updates. It got till iOS 6, which came out late 2012, and that means full updates through to near the end of 2013 when iOS 7 came out. So you have iOS 6, and it's really fast. Like, it performs better than the iPhone 4 on iOS 7 and the 4S on iOS 9 for some perspective. The 3GS for longevity did really well, and for that alone, it gets a B tier nod. I think it's just a good phone, just a solid phone. Okay, next we move to 2021. So we start with the iPhone 13 and 13 mini. This was a great phone. It was a solid upgrade over the 12 with the chipset, and the cameras and everything got a little bit better. The battery life for me was a big standout. The 13's battery was quite a bit better than the 12's, and particularly the 13 mini got a couple extra hours of life, which was really needed. So for me, the 13 was just a good phone and should probably go in, I'm gonna say B tier, because I love the mini iPhone, and this was the last time Apple's probably ever gonna do one. Having a small compact package like the 13 mini is such an underrated thing for Apple to have done in the first place, and the iPhone 13 mini probably will end up being the best small smartphone of all time, period, because I highly doubt Apple's gonna be making any more of them, and no other companies seem to, unless it's a budget phone. So yeah, 13, we'll stick it in B tier, why not? Then there's the 13 Pro. This was a really good phone because not only did it make the notch a bit smaller, which the 13 did as well, by the way, but the display finally got 120 Hz with ProMotion. That alone makes it a great phone in my opinion, and it was a decent upgrade over the 12 Pro. It's probably what the 12 Pro should have been, but aside from ProMotion, it didn't bring that much new. Good camera improvements, that sort of thing. I'm gonna stick it right with the 14 Pro in C tier. Solid, good upgrade, but nothing that special either. Okay, going back in time here, we go to 2010 with the iPhone 4. This is S tier, and that's that. Do I need to go into the iPhone 4? I've done it so many times in different videos. Retina display, A4 chipset, huge camera improvements. First, like, truly premium smartphone design, I think, out there. Like, the glass and stainless steel was gorgeous to the point that Apple brought it back, and a lot of these phones we've put on here have glass and stainless steel. 13 Pro, 14 Pro, prime examples. So yeah, I'm gonna go with S tier for the iPhone 4, even though we do have the downsides of antenna gates and it not being that fast on iOS 7. Even so, I think S tier is more than fair. All right, we're moving through these now. 2020, there's a lot of phones to go through here. We'll start with the early one again. You got the iPhone SE2. This one's a hard one to rank, actually. This, when it came out, had the newest chipset at the time, the A13, the same that was in the iPhone 11. Good phone, solid phone, same hardware as the iPhone 8, but the iPhone 8 was only 3 years old at this point, so it wasn't as bad. And the camera was definitely behind, with no night mode especially, but it wasn't that far behind because you had only had a big upgrade with the iPhone 11 line, and this came out like 6 months after that. So I think the SE2 was solid, not the best value, but solid. So I'm gonna go with C tier for it. It's certainly nothing exciting. The design is just an iPhone 8, and the hardware is pretty much just the iPhone 8, but for people who wanted a home button, I think it was a really, really solid package. Then you've got the 2020 iPhone 12. This phone's hard to judge. It brought the 12 mini, which I really like, as explained with the 13. The design is quite nice. The 12 line got this nice squared off like iPhone 5-esque design. The big thing with the iPhone 12 that makes it great is it brought the OLED display, whereas the iPhone 11 had LCD. That was a huge jump in quality for not a whole lot more money. So because of that, I'm gonna put iPhone 12 also in B tier. I love the addition of the mini. I love having OLED on the non-pros. I personally opted for the 12 over the 12 Pro because they were practically the same phone, so I think B tier is more than justified. Speaking of which, now we have the 12 Pro. So the 12 Pro changed the design. It brought LiDAR, and that's about it. It should have brought ProMotion, 120 Hz, and it didn't. This phone was a bit of a disappointment in my eyes. Oh, the iPhone 12 line also brought MagSafe, which was a nice addition. This wasn't a very great upgrade of the 11 Pro. It's not as if they were bad phones. They're still good phones. They just weren't a very big upgrade. So I'm going to stick it in E tier because it also was so similar to the iPhone 12. I mean, I purposely bought the 12 over the 12 Pro because they were so similar. So I think that E tier is fair. The design was really nice, but aside from that, it just didn't do a whole lot. So that's 2020. Now we're on to 2011. That's the iPhone 4S. This one's tough. The 4S has a lot of good, but has a lot of bad as well. So for the good, first dual core chipset in an iPhone, Siri, which, you know, was a big deal at the time. The camera was like a huge upgrade, actually. It was 8 megapixels for the first time and actually takes, even now, like not bad photos, at least considering the age. It was small. 2011, people wanted bigger phones. Apple didn't do it. It was the same design as the iPhone 4. It also got to iOS 9. Now, this is both good and bad. So it got 5 years of smartphone updates and is the first smartphone to do so. But iOS 9 is incredibly slow on this thing. Like it's unusable practically. So the 4S for me, it's gonna be solidly in, I'm gonna put it in C tier because it brought enough innovation with the cameras to, I think, make up for a lot of its shortcomings. It could almost be B tier because here's the thing, right? It's funny. It's really hard to look at these and judge new iPhones the same way you judge old iPhones because the jumps year to year were so massive early on, and if you compare the jump from the iPhone 4 to the 4S is actually fairly substantial. So for, you know what, I'm gonna stick it in B tier. It was a really good iPhone, and I think it's, yeah, on the same level as the 3GS for sure. I also have a bit of a nostalgia bias, so me putting these two phones at the same tier as this is me trying to fight that bias, because if I embraced it, I would basically have all the old iPhones on top and all the new ones on the bottom. Gotta try to take into perspective the fact that we are so far along down the road, technology is advanced, and so there's only so much more that can get better year to year versus back in the early days, there was a lot of room for improvement every single smartphone upgrade. So that's the 2011 iPhone 4S solidly in B tier for now. And we're back. It definitely has not been a month since we last were doing this. Yeah, I got kind of caught up with stuff. WWDC happened, and well, we're gonna finish it now. It's actually good though. It's interesting because I'm working on a video right now called The Peak of iPhone, which presents the question, did iPhone peak? And if so, when did it peak? And I think this sort of video will hopefully help with that because I'm still kind of struggling with the answer, but I also want to hear from you guys. So if you have a thought on that, definitely put it in the comments for me. So before we really get back into this, I've had some time to think about the tier list, so I wanted to make a few tweaks. The first one, I think I moved the SE2 down from C tier to D tier just because I think that's more fair given it's basically just the iPhone 8. I reordered everything by year just for simplicity's sake, but there was a couple little things I wanted to change. The first was I was going to put the 13 Pro in B tier and the 12 in C tier. I know the 12 and 13 aren't like a whole lot different, but I think the battery life on the 12 mini just wasn't very good. I think just doing this makes more sense phones. Also, the 12 was 64 gigs and the 13 was 128 gigs, and that's kind of a big deal, honestly. Like, that's quite the gap. So anyways, we're gonna go with that. Oh yeah, I was gonna also move just the 2G up to S tier. I know that seems kind of crazy considering the beginning of this video, but we're actually gonna have a few A tier phones, I think, by the time we're done this, so it's not as wild as you think. But since I've been working on the peak of iPhone, I came to realize that there just are no iPhones that match that phone in terms of innovation, right? Because it was just a new thing at the time, and nothing else really can compare to that. So I think S tier is more than fair for it. Okay, enough retconning. Back to what we were doing. So I think we're on to the 11 or 11 Pro now. I think the 11 is actually going to be, I'm actually going to stick it in B tier. I know B tier is getting kind of full, but that's okay. I think the 11 is a good B tier phone. Thing is, it's not a whole lot different from the 10R, right? But it did bring the ultra wide camera, which was new. The big thing with it is it actually lowered the price from $750 to $700, which, when was the last time? Well, this was the last time Apple lowered prices. They just don't do that. Apple does not lower prices. So them doing that for me makes it kind of a B tier phone. I think that's fair. I don't know if anyone's going to agree with me there, but I think that would be fair to say. As for the 11 Pro, I'm actually going to stick it in A tier. Yeah, I know, crazy. But the thing is, the 11 Pro brought the ultra wide camera, which is already big. Midnight green was a fantastic color. The frosted glass, something we still use. The phone is just really good. I think that's the easiest way to put it. It was also the last phone to not only come with a charging brick, but it came with a fast charging brick, which I think is something kind of underrated you wouldn't really think about. Oh, that's another reason to knock the 12 down to C tier, actually. The 11 Pro's camera was its biggest improvement, and it really kind of just nailed it. The triple lens setup alone was already pretty great, but the fact that it could do night mode now was really necessary. It was a big jump for the 10S, and the biggest thing that I loved about the 11 Pro was the battery life. The battery life got like 4 hours better or something along those lines over the 10S, and the 10S, that was its worst thing for sure, was its battery life. So to see that kind of jump was really impressive, and I think it's deserving of A tier. We're now at the iPhone 5 2012, which is also going to be A tier. This was the phone that came with iOS 6, which was that old design, very classic, iconic even. The iPhone 5 changed up the design. It went to the 16:9 ratio, which is kind of awesome and was very necessary. It brought Lightning, which was really cool. It brought LTE, which was very necessary. Like, it just did a lot of really important things to modernize iPhone and bring it up to speed. It got 5 years of support up to iOS 10. It was like not slow on iOS 10 either, which I think is impressive. That iPhone 5 design is still potentially the best iPhone design ever, to the point that with the iPhone 12, they kind of went back to it in a way. Like the squared off edges, they certainly did. It's an evolution of the iPhone 4 design, but in all the right ways. So iPhone 5 2012 A tier, easily A tier. Next up, we would have, I guess, the iPhone XS and XR. Starting with the XR, I think the XR is a good C tier phone. Yeah, we're gonna stick it in C tier. So the XR had some really good things to it. It was a somewhat budget iPhone, right? It was $750 versus $1,000 for the base XS. It was a bit bigger than the base XS. It was also better for battery life. It had the main camera, only one camera lens, but the main one. XR is a good phone, and it was just solid, and C tier is solid. Value-wise, not as good as the 11, but still pretty great. A12 chipset, it's getting iOS 18. Both the XS and the XR are getting iOS 18, which is awesome. That's a relatively new development since WWDC happened. So solid C tier phone, perhaps the perfect C tier phone. Not a whole lot bad with it. I mean, the display is obviously nothing spectacular, but that was intentional to get that price point. Now we have the iPhone XS, also 2018. This phone's biggest issue is that it was the phone that came right after the iPhone 10. So it's not really its fault, kind of, but since the 10 was a really significant leap, they just didn't have a lot to give with the iPhone XS. The 11 Pro was a decent leap, but the XS was not. It is probably the smallest S upgrade ever. All it really did was bring the XS Max. That was kind of it. The cameras, I guess, got little improvements, but it was so minor. The A12 is a good chipset, and it is getting iOS 18, so it's getting an extra year of software support over the iPhone 10, 7 years versus 6, which is really great, but overall, pretty lackluster upgrade. And I remember at the time buying the iPhone XS from my iPhone 10 and being pretty disappointed by the lack of change. So we're gonna stick this one in E tier. It's not an F tier iPhone. It's better than that, and the Max was really nice, but it's just not a great upgrade at all, and basically they could have kept the iPhone 10 another year and probably no one would have noticed the difference. But iOS 18 keeps it above an F tier in my opinion. Okay, next up is going to be the iPhone 5S and 5C. Okay, let's start with the 5C. This is unfortunately F tier. I love the 5C. I have the iPhone 5C, like I owned it back in the day. It was the first phone I bought myself, used off of eBay. I had been working over the summer and was able to afford an iPhone 5C in 2014, I think, and it was awesome. I got it in blue blue. I really loved that phone. I really did. But the iPhone 5C was, as far as Apple goes, a bit of a commercial failure. It didn't do that great. It still sold really well compared to other phones, but you can't just compare to other phones. You need to compare it to other iPhones because it's Apple, right? The plastic, the value proposition was not good. The thing is it came in at the same price as the iPhone 5 would have if the iPhone 5 had stuck around, but they discontinued it and then took the iPhone 5 and put it in plastic. That's what the 5C was, a plastic iPhone 5. For the same price the 5 should have been had it stuck around. Thus, the value was not good at all. I don't know what Apple was thinking, making it only $100 cheaper than the 5S. Had it been even $150 cheaper, it would have been a significantly better phone in my opinion for it. They also made an 8GB model like a year later, I think, which unfortunately adds to the problems. 8 gigs was so little space. That was brutal. I think they sold that up to the 6S's launch, so yeah, no. F tier, unfortunately, but hey, I don't think anyone expected different. Okay, iPhone 5S, S tier. Yeah, I mean, what is there to say about the 5S other than it was fantastic? It brought the A7 chipset, which was the first 64-bit chipset in any smartphone. Touch ID, biometrics, it brought iOS 7. It's easy to look nostalgically at like iOS 6 and that old design, but people were hyped for the iOS 7 change. People were just ecstatic, and the gold color, something simple, but people really wanted it. The 5S brought a lot of good, and it also got 6 years of software support up to iOS 12, which iOS 12 actually improved performance over iOS 11. It was just they just handled that phone like perfectly. It was the best version of an S upgrade, and possibly one of, if not the best iPhones ever. It had that beautiful iPhone 5 design, even better with Touch ID now. Like, there's just so much to love with the 5S that it absolutely has to be S tier. Like, I probably missed some stuff. I'm sure I've missed a lot of stuff with a lot of these phones, but I don't think too many will disagree with me. Okay, so now we're in 2017, which means the iPhone 8 and 10. Ooh, these are fun. Okay, we'll start with the iPhone 8/8 Plus. This is gonna be probably a solid C tier phone, right? I would think so. I think it's on par with the iPhone XR. The 8 it could have been its own upgrade over the iPhone 7 and would have been a similar level of upgrade that the iPhone 7 itself was, but they didn't do that. They also came out with the 10, so that made the 8 kind of the budget option, which was awesome. It's just a good phone. It's basically the best version of the iPhone 6 design. I mean, the SE3 and the SE2 are just iPhone 8s with better processors, right? So clearly that design is popular, and I think there's just no question the iPhone 8 is a really, maybe not great, but good phone, right? Wireless charging, the glass, everything, absolutely C tier. Got 6 years of support, not as much as the 6S or the iPhone XR, but still did pretty darn well. Okay, iPhone 10, this is S tier easy. There's no real question here. I think most people would agree. The 10 is, aside from the first iPhone, it's the one that changed the most. The iPhone 4 was also a big deal, and the 5S brought a lot too, but in terms of design, the 10 is the only iPhone that significantly changed things so drastically. The entire experience changed. How we use our phones, swiping around, gesture system, all this stuff, that was the iPhone 10 did that. Everything has sort of just been a continuation of that iPhone 10 design. The hype around it was insane. It is absolutely an S tier phone and one of the best iPhones ever made. Am I biased in that because it was the first iPhone I bought brand new? Absolutely, but I don't think you can genuinely say the iPhone 10 wasn't an S tier iPhone. It just is. It really is. The only problems with it, iOS 11 was super buggy and the battery life wasn't great. Those two things. Aside from that, everything else was pretty top of the line, and if you didn't like the notch or the lack of home button, then you could just buy the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus. So having that sort of option was just, honestly, it was nice, and I'm glad Apple's been doing their pros and non-pros. I think it adds a lot to the lineup. So yeah, that was the iPhone 10. Now we're on to, I guess, oh man, we're getting there now. iPhone 6 and 6 Plus, 2014. Oh, this is actually a really hard one to do. Okay, the pros of the iPhone 6. It was super hyped. People were really excited for it. It's the best-selling smartphone of all time. It's because it was a large iPhone and people desperately wanted a large iPhone. The iPhone 6 was that. It provided that, and that's awesome. But also, it kind of didn't actually change much from the 5S. It brought NFC to Apple Pay, which is good. But aside from that, it was just a bigger 5S with, in my opinion, a worse design. I far prefer the 5S design, the look of it. Also, bendgate. I can't forget about bendgate. That was a serious detriment. Of course, the iPhone 4 had antenna gate, but that was a little bit different. You could just hold your phone differently and you would get signal just fine. The iPhone 6, bending would happen over time if you weren't using a case. Even if you were using a case, it could still happen. And touch disease happened as well. If you dropped your phone the wrong way, it could absolutely just, the touchscreen would stop working. It was a significant issue. It was not durable. The iPhone 6, I think, is a good D tier phone. There's a few things about it that bring it above maybe E and F. Like I would consider it on the same level as like the 15 Pro. I think that's fair, but it's definitely not like a great iPhone either. It's a bit mediocre in what it actually brought to the table aside from the size. So that brings us to the SE and the 7, and then the 6S. The SE I'm actually going to stick up in A tier. I know, that might be a little bit surprising. I'm just realizing this is out of order. Oops, that's still not right. Hold on. Math is hard. The iPhone SE was the iPhone 5S with the iPhone 6S's hardware, and this was something new for Apple. They had never done something like this. But I think it was something really, really important for establishing that Apple could actually make a good budget iPhone. We've never really had a budget iPhone quite as good as it. So like the SE2 and the SE3, they're there, but the SE was a really good price. It started at 16 gigs, which it wasn't great, but considering, I think it was around $400 or $350. I think they lowered the price as time went on. It was just a really good phone. Like, it had the same camera as the 6S, it had the same chipset as the 6S, and it showed that Apple hadn't forgotten about the people who didn't want a bigger phone yet. I think that's kind of awesome that they did that, and Apple deserves credit for it. The SE was just a good phone, and it was really good value. It also got like almost 7 years of support. Technically it didn't, because the 6S came out late 2015 and got till late 2022. The SE came out early 2016 and got to late 2022. So it got more like 6.5 years of support, but that's still really, really good. iOS 15 on it isn't slow. It's pretty solid. It was a great iPhone, and yeah, A tier it is. Okay, the iPhone 7. So the iPhone 7 and 7 Plus, they're basically the 6SS, right? The 7 Plus brought the telephoto lens. They removed the headphone jack. They brought water resistance, although the 6S was sort of water resistant, but not officially. They brought like some of the best colors we've ever seen on iPhone. Jet black is beautiful. Matte black as well. So there was some good there. The dual firing speakers. It only got 6 years of software support, whereas the 6S got 7, so that's not great comparatively. The 7 for me, the headphone jack removal is something I've always hated. I wish Apple didn't do it. I think it's stupid they did. I'm gonna stick it in E tier. That might be unpopular with some people, because the thing is, the 7 wasn't a bad phone by any means, but neither was the iPhone 14, neither was the 5C. Like, none of these were actually bad phones, but in terms of being an upgrade, in terms of how it stacks against other iPhones, it just ain't it, you know? Like, the removal of the headphone jack alone, I think, is worthy of making it lower than some of these other devices. And yeah, the 7 Plus with the telephoto lens, really great. The capacitive home button as well, I forgot about that. Overall, E tier I think is probably pretty darn fair. I know having it lower than the iPhone 6 might seem weird, but it's easy to forget just how hyped people actually were for that larger display size, so it's fine. We're gonna go with E tier. Okay, last but not least, baby, we've got the iPhone 6S. The 6S is like the quintessential S upgrade iPhone, I think. It had the same design as the iPhone 6. It added a color in rose gold. It had second gen Touch ID. It had the A9 chipset. It got 7 years of software support. It brought 3D Touch, which Apple didn't really, unfortunately, unlock the true potential for, but still really cool. The camera quality got a lot better to 12 megapixels and 4K video. The 6S in general is just a really great iPhone, and I gotta give it A tier. I think it makes sense to have it right with the SE, because I think the SE was great as well, and that right there ends up being the list. So part of this, I wanted to keep like the numbers fairly even. None of these have more than 5 iPhones, I don't think. F tier is only 2 iPhones, but I mean, Apple's been pretty good over the years, right? So that kind of makes sense. Yeah, some people are gonna be mad, but I think this is for the most part pretty justified. So definitely leave your comments down below what you think. I think this is a pretty, like, I wouldn't make any changes here. Oh, almost forgot. I need to look at my old tier list and compare it. I'm not gonna watch that whole video. If you're curious on my old tier list, I'll link it in the description. Okay, I think this is it. So here we go. What's different? Well, I had the iPhone 6 in F tier. Now I have it in D tier. That's interesting. That's that's kind of wild, actually. I had it in F tier before, huh? I think it's just because I've done videos recently talking about the iPhone 6 in some way that it's forced me to raise it higher. I get having it in F tier because of bend gates and the fact that it was barely an upgrade over the 5S, but the bigger size was kind of a big deal at the time, and NFC, I think it deserves more credit. The 10S and 7 I've got at the same spots, which makes sense. The SE2 I had an E tier, and now I've got it in D tier. That's interesting. It's probably because the SE3 made me realize the SE2 actually wasn't that bad. This video was done after the 13 and 13 Pro came out, I guess. Yeah, I think it was around Christmas 21. So I have the 12 Pro in D tier. I have it in E tier now. I think that makes sense. The 13 Pro I have in C tier. I have it in B tier now. What else do I have different? I have the SE1 down in C tier. This might be controversial. I guess it is kind of weird to have the SE in A tier and the 4S in B tier, right? You could probably swap those, but I don't know, it's different. I think the fact that Apple did a budget phone when they kind of refuse to do a good budget phone these days is important to me. The 11 Pro in A tier now versus B tier, I think some of this just comes down to the fact that iPhone upgrades in recent years have been so minimal. It makes me think differently about some of the other phones, you know? The 11 in C tier, 12, 13 Pro. What do I have the 13 in? I have it in D tier. Oh, that's interesting. I wonder why I did that. Part of the reason I have the 13 higher now is because the 13 mini is the last mini iPhone, and I like that Apple did that. That's interesting that I had it in D tier, actually. Battery life on the 13 mini is actually pretty good, all things considered. Like, it's not great, but it's pretty good. Definitely better than the 12 mini. Interesting. I have the 8 in D tier, and I have it in C tier here. Yeah, this actually changed a lot. I'm a little bit surprised how much it changed. I'm glad I didn't look beforehand, because it's kind of interesting how my perspectives changed. D, 3G, a lot of these older iPhones, yeah, I mean, they changed a bit. It's also crazy how many more iPhones there is now. I think there's 28 now. So there's actually been 5 iPhones since I did this last tier list. That makes sense. So it definitely, this tier list is a lot more evened out, which I kind of like visually, but well, that's the list, guys. Let me know in the comments what you think, and I will have, again, in the description, the tier maker, so you can make your own using this template if you'd like to, and if you do, hey, come post it in our Discord. I'd love to see it. You can post it in today's video, that channel. I'll have a link, of course, to Discord, the server, which is a great server to come hang out. That'll be in the description below as well. Always love talking to you guys over there, and also would love to hear about what you think the peak of iPhone is. Like, we've got a few S tiers here, but if you had to break it down to one iPhone being the absolute peak, when iPhone was at its absolute best, what would it be? Not necessarily the best iPhone, but when iPhone felt the best. Like the 5S, for example, might be the best iPhone, but it came alongside the 5C. So I wouldn't consider it the peak of iPhone, right? It's kind of funny, this contradistinction between the 5S and 5C, given they came out at the same time. Anyways, that's it from me. Thank you so much for watching. Again, Discord, description. I've got socials I don't use if you want to follow me over there. Huge shout out to the channel members. You guys are the absolute best. It means so much. Thank you for sticking around. And without further ado, I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and I will see you all next time.